to the fifth in our series. I'd like to thank all of you who have braved the August long weekend popular holiday week to join us today. We've actually got a very good turnout. I'm pleasantly surprised. Thank you. And I know there's a group more that is going to be joining us on the recording. So for those of you who are joining us later, welcome. As I said, this is the fifth in our series, and we're going to take a look at developing the schedule today. So let's get started. Just cover off some logistics. As always, we've got our awesome support Lauren here to help. So if you're having any difficulties or challenges, just pop into either the question window or the chat box and type her a note. So if you can't hear, if there's a sound issue or anything. And again, as always, we record these sessions, make them available afterwards. Keep in mind that sometimes the sound does get a little out of sync. We found that when we're getting started, sometimes it gets a little out of sync. Just give it a few moments and it'll align. Now, just wanted to put up the what you're seeing as a control panel and just show you a couple of the features here. At the very top there where the arrow is pointing, the blue arrow, there's a little red arrow that you can use to collapse that off to the side so that if you're running a little bit short on real estate and want to kind of more full screen it. You also have a chat box, so if you just click on that little blue icon down there, you'll have a chat, as well as you can raise your hand. So again, if you're having any issues. Our session, as always, is going to be fairly interactive. So we're going to ask you to participate, and we're going to use this little icon, the thought bubble, to indicate to you that it's time for you to give us some feedback. Either doing that through the question box or the chat window is appropriate. So we'll continue through there. So let's get started. Our opening thought for this session: be quick, but don't hurry. And this is actually the title of a book. It's a famous quote from John Wooden, and John is a well, he's now no longer with us, unfortunately, but he was the UCLA Bruins coach for many years, and during a 10-year span, he was the NCAA champions for 7 out of those 10 years. This is an unprecedented feat that has never been duplicated. And one of his players during that period, Andrew Hill, wrote a book around his learnings around this, and he entitled it Be Quick But Don't Hurry. And this is one of those books that's on my regular reread list, and I really, really enjoy it. But it's all about kind of creating that sense of urgency, which does foster efficiency. But what you need to do is you need to go slow to go fast. So you want to be quick about things, but if we're efficient, we can actually get things done quickly without hurrying. And if you think about just driving, for example. When you first learn to drive, there's so many things happening so quickly, and now it all happens very slowly, although we can actually travel fairly quickly. So, we're not hurrying, but we're being quick. So when we can slow down, when we can take our time, we can develop those skills and efficiencies, we can actually deliver very quickly without hurrying. And it's when we hurry that's when we really run into trouble, hence the old don't run with scissors. Challenges from our first session. Again, looking back at these and thinking, what are some of the things that a good schedule is going to help us with? Communications for sure. Getting the support from senior management when they see we've got a good, solid schedule there. We can often use that to help gain that support, as well as dealing with time constraints, both from a standpoint of meeting those time restraints as well as negotiating for extended times so that we're not, rushing, and we're getting enough time to actually get through what needs to get done. So as I mentioned, we're on step 5, and our step is actually called develop the initial schedule. We touched on in the first sessions around it being very iterative in nature and progressive elaboration. So on that first session, on that first pass, we won't necessarily have all of the details we need. So we're going to do the initial schedule, and then once we've got that initial schedule, we'll have an idea, are we meeting the timelines that are mandated, or do we have people who are overloaded, underloaded, and hence we'll be iterating through that multiple times. So we can make sure that we've got something that's actually realistic. So again, step 5, develop the schedule. What will come out of this is resource analysis tables as well as our Gantt chart. So we're going to start off today with a question. And our question for you this morning is, what factors are preventing you from creating a realistic schedule? And I just want to highlight the word realistic on this. You know, putting these sessions together, we've only got an hour. I'm thinking, you know, what's the best way I can provide you some value for that hour? And I thought, you know, if we focus on the realistic as opposed to the if we focus on the realistic side of the schedule as opposed to the mechanics of actually creating a schedule, then we will, I think we'll have a much better time. So just pop into the chat window or the question box, and you can enter in your answers there, and we'll see them come up. So let's just give that a few moments. Oh, we've got the first one. Couple coming in. Excellent. Oh, look at that. Fast and Furious. Love it. Thank you so much. So let's take a look at some of these, and I'm just going to make that a little bigger so I can read it. Gotta love these technical challenges, eh? Okay, what do we got here? Oh, Fast and Furious. So working, what else the resources are working on that take them away from our project, by Eleanor. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. So we're often fighting for resources. Understanding what resources are available. So again, back to an availability issue from Keith. Undefined scope from Nulia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, I apologize. So undefined scope, absolutely. And we did talk about scope in step 2, where we wanted to, you know, tighten that down. People, expertise schedules where availability is an issue, competing with priorities, absolutely seeing that again. Lack of sufficient information, rescope from Beth. Hey Beth, congratulations on your PMP, by the way. Sorry. Incomplete and inaccurate information from other departments, from Elizabeth. Getting estimates from other departments, absolutely. So we're getting those estimates that aren't realistic. Feature creep, yes, and budget constraints, absolutely, from Debbie, yes. Business already predetermined. Oh, I love that one. Thank you, Mahesh. Yeah, business is already predetermined how long it's going to take, and it's like, you know what, no matter what you do, it's here's when it's going to be done, and they think they know better. Absolutely, yeah, and then they expect us to do it, right? And sometimes we're our own worst enemies there, because we do a good job, and then they think we're, you know, magic workers, and we can pull things out of the bag. Biggest challenge in my business are the unknown unknowns. Yes, and Sarah, come back for step 7. We're going to go into detail on risk in step 7, and we'll address the unknown unknowns, which can radically change the time needed schedule to finish tasks. Absolutely. And there's an interesting thing in that unknown unknowns, Sarah, where how you manage an R&D type project where there's lots of unknown unknowns is actually far different than how we manage something where we've got lots of knowns. Requirements not clear, stakeholders take too long to decide. Yes, absolutely. So these are some great barriers. Thank you, guys. This is awesome. Okay, our next question for you is, what are the skills that will help you address or deal with some of those barriers? Okay, so just to recap some of the barriers, things like scope creep, things like resource availability, people being pulled off for other projects, stakeholders, you know, the business units predetermining how long it's going to take, you know, things like that. So let's give it a few moments for those answers to come in. So what skills would help us address those setbacks? Okay, getting some answers coming in. So I'm just trying to find where the dividing line is between the two. Just give me half a second here. Good communication skills, definitely. Okay, I think there we are. Good. Okay, so from Debbie, good communication skills, absolutely. That's a key one. Communication is such a big part of our job. Gathering requirements or having appropriate requirements gathered. Yes, absolutely, Kim. Beautiful. They seem to be coming in a funny order here. There we go. Communication and negotiating skills with managers and stakeholders. Love it, Eleanor. Thank you. Yes, so the communication, but building on that with negotiation. We're actually going to talk a little bit about negotiation today. Influencing from Beth. Yes, influence is a huge, huge, huge skill that you need to have, and communication is a big piece of that, absolutely. Strong risk anticipation. Yes, and it's we try to deconstruct this thing that we call project management, and we've got our 47 processes. We look at phases, and more and more we're seeing it's constantly, it's so integrated. And again, step 7, we're going to go into some great detail on risk there. And I've actually got a really cool case study actual project that I was on where risk was a key factor in us successfully completing it. Understanding consensus, final deliverables, absolutely. Again, knowing what that destination is. Communication, scope baseline, prioritization, another key one, absolutely. You cannot manage a project effectively if you haven't prioritized. Thank you, Mahesh. Identifying the schedule to the business so that they understand what it takes. Oh, I love it, Kim, that's awesome. Let's just deconstruct that for a second. Identifying the schedule to the business so that they can understand. Okay, and that's a key thing. It doesn't matter whether you understand. If they don't understand, you've missed. Okay, so doing it in a way that makes sense to them, and especially when we get different departments interacting, whether it's IT in a business or legal in a business and so on, and it just, we're all speaking different languages. So awesome, thank you so much. Clear, concise communications, and key one there, again, Nulia, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Clear communications, clear and concise communications, as well as expectations. So beautiful. You guys are all over this. This is awesome. Okay. So looking at some of the common factors that we see, things like environment, culture of the organization, so what your environment is like, how busy you are, what's the culture of the organization, what are the expectations typically like, and then of course managing those expectations is kind of a wrapping up of those. Merge bias, we touched on merge bias last time when we talked about the schedule and how the probability of getting things done when we've got that and getting both A and B and C done reduces our probability of getting it done. Now the good news is merge bias also reduces the potential of all of the risks happening, so there's a bit of a trade-off there. Optimism bias, one we haven't chatted about yet, and we're actually going to go into detail on optimism bias today. We also have productivity I put in there as a factor because we've estimated it's going to take us 16 hours to get this job done, so we think, oh, 2 days, right? And we're going to go into a little bit of detail on that. And then the final one that I added was a BHAG. And BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. This is from Jim Collins' book. We referenced him last week, or was it the week before? Wow, I'm starting to forget which is which. And we're gonna kind of bring that back into our ending piece at the end because BHAGs are actually really good things, and sometimes they're scary, right? They're big, hairy, audacious goals. But we'll talk a little bit about some of the psychology around that. Okay, so we're going to focus in today on the optimism bias and productivity. Again, very short amount of time we're together today, so wanted to kind of really tighten down our focus. So with that in mind, I would like to get you to fill in this poll. Are humans generally optimistic or pessimistic by nature? And this is 100% a, it's you got to pick one or the other. So, I know a lot of you are saying, well, sometimes depends. And very broad brush here, folks, generally optimistic, pessimistic by nature. And we've got 71% voted, so just give it another couple moments. Okay, I think 75%. All right, so let's display the results. Very close split here. This is very interesting. We're looking at 57 to 43. Wow, that's interesting. Now, I'm gonna challenge all the people who said pessimistic. So in terms of a schedule, if people are being pessimistic and saying, oh, it's going to take longer, how come our schedules or our projects are not delivering in shorter time? So studies have shown that human beings in general are optimistic creatures. In general, about 80%, 80 to 90%, depending upon whose studies you read, are optimistic. So if we think about this, this makes a lot of sense. This is actually how we conquered the planet. So here's this guy, Chris Columbus, and he says, I'm going to go sail out west, find that route to China. And they all said, Chris, you're going to go off the edge and die. And he said, okay, see ya, I'm on my way. Another classic example is the famous Arctic expedition with Shackleton. And he put out an ad which basically said, great hardship, long hours of darkness, return doubtful, and he had people lining up to sign up for this. And there was no pay, by the way. So, you know, people are generally optimistic, and unfortunately, or fortunately, it's actually one of those kind of good and bad things. The optimism bias kind of plays out. Back to the slides, thank you. The optimism bias plays out in two main ways. The first is we overestimate our own abilities. About 80% of drivers polled rate themselves as above average. The other way that the optimism bias plays itself out is we underestimate the bad things that might happen to us. So this picture here, the one on the left of the driver, that I just pulled off the internet. The one on the right, however, I actually took. It's the warning sign on the lighthouse at Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia. So I flew out to Nova Scotia for a training class one time, and I then drove to Peggy's Cove for dinner. Right, it's one of those kind of destination spots, and I actually probably drove a little bit faster than I should have, but of course that's my superior driving ability. And I arrived there just in time for sunset. So I had this lovely lobster dinner, you know, watching the sunset over the ocean. It was, yeah, it was lovely. So actually the sunset's on the other side of the country. The sunset's in the west, not in the east. Yeah, so it was sunset anyways. So I had this nice dinner. The sun goes down. It's now nice and dark. And I think, well, I'm going to walk out to the lighthouse, which is, you know, over some rocks, and sort of, you know, just get a little bit of a look because I didn't have time when I arrived. And I came across this sign, and I thought, oh, that's kind of a funny sign. And then I kept going and managed to skin my shin as I bumped into a rock in the dark and came back and took a picture of the sign. So we underestimate the bad things that can happen to us. So we think, you know what, that happened to the other guy. It's not going to happen to us. Right? And then we overestimate our abilities. So we tend to set ourselves up often for kind of these negative impacts. Now, what can we do about this? Well, the first thing we can do is acknowledge the optimism bias, okay? And kind of take a look at that and say, you know, are we being realistic here, okay? And there's lots of ways around the optimism bias. The other big thing that we can do is make sure that we are being, that we're not framing our question in such a way that it encourages the optimism. So let me give you a quick scenario. You're on a project that has already a tight timeline. You know this is going to be one of those rush ones. So you go and ask for an estimate. So you go to Sam and say, Sam, how long is this going to take? He says, oh, it's going to take like 2 weeks. And you go, oh, dude, you're killing me. I need it faster. He says, okay, well, if everything goes just right, you know, I'm probably squeeze it out in a week. Well, what we've just done is we've turned a 2-year project into a 1-year project. We've just literally cut the project in half. So we want to be very cautious because optimism bias, you know, we tend to think, we overestimate how good we're going to be, we underestimate bad things are going to happen to us, and we give these optimistic estimates. Now, we're going to come back to this when we talk about BHAGs at the end, because there's actually some good stuff that does come out of this. And, you know, the optimism bias, they've actually done some scientific studies on this with fMRI studies that show the positive news lights up more vigorously in your brain than negative news. So if we give people positive news, their brains tend to be more active than when we give them negative news, and how we frame it that way. So our brains are almost pre-wired to process the positive information better than the negative. So it's something we kind of want to be aware of and really kind of deal with. Now, the next piece that we want to take a look at is productivity. And I'm going to pose this question: is how productive are your peeps? How productive are your people? So Lauren, if you want to bring up that poll, and the options that we have, 12 hours out of 8 hours, so highly productive, 8 hours out of 8 hours. 5 hours out of 8 hours, and 1 hour out of 8 hours. And what we're looking for here is the average number. Okay, so this is, yeah, there's times when we're going to sprint, but what do you think the average number is? Wow, got some interesting results coming. We got 57% voted, 64%, 71%. Give another few seconds. All right. So let's pop those results up. So I think we've got a very realistic group. 91% said 5 hours out of 12, or sorry, 5 hours out of 8, excuse me. So something just north of half. Depending, again, what studies you read, somewhere it's about 50%, 75%, 80%. And it's, yeah, it's one of those things where, management doesn't want to accept that. 5% said 8 hours and 5% said 12 out of 8. Please let me know what company you're working for, because I'm not going to come work there. There are times when we are 12 hours out of 8 productive, absolutely, but yeah, not really sustainable. And this whole concept around that level of productivity, we need to be aware from a temporary nature of projects perspective. If we are asking people to run, to sprint, if you will, so that's the 12 hours out of 8. That's the 8 hours out of 8 even, in fact. If we're asking people to sprint, is that sustainable? And we often think of projects are temporary in nature, but temporary can be 5 years. And especially in today's world, 5 years, I mean, that's a lifetime. That's a whole career for some people. If you look at, the way people move around jobs. So, a month, yes, I can do some sprinting there. Now, in my job as a trainer, when I'm in class, I'm sprinting. Think about it as a student. You have the option to step out. You need to go to the bathroom. You need to take a phone call. You need to, go to a meeting or something. You show up a little bit late. You leave a little bit early. You have these kind of options. I need to be there before you arrive. Get everything all set up. Be available on breaks. Be available on lunch for questions, and then close everything down and shut it all down after you leave. So when I'm training, I am doing 9-10 hours of productive work a day, and I can tell you it is not sustainable. After a couple of weeks, it's like, I need a break. So you want to kind of think about that from a project perspective. And when I look back at the projects for me that were really successful, it's the ones that we ran on more of a marathon pace than a sprinter's pace. Now, are there going to be times when you sprint? 100%. Right? Having done a lot of IT projects, when you get into the implementation phase, we've been doing lots of coding, we've been doing lots of testing, adjusting, and so forth. And then when we get to that implementation phase, it's, all hands on deck. We're going to work through the night. We're going to get this thing up and running. So, 9 a.m. the next morning, we're ready to go. But you then don't ask your team, after having worked through the night, to work through the day. We find that balance, and really that's kind of what we're talking about here. So, got a quote. An interesting statistics I once read said that people are normally productive about 5 to 7 hours in an 8-hour business day. And then that quote continues on to say, but anytime there's a change in control takes place, their productivity drops to less than an hour. And that was Dennis Kozlowski he's the CEO of Tyco International. So let's think about that. When a change takes place. And this is now, particularly, this is a change of control, but I want to think about your personal productivity for a moment when you are in the midst of change, and whether that's personal change or business change in your workplace. We all go through major upheavals in our lives over the time. We move, we get married, divorced, hopefully not. We have family members who fall sick. We might have elderly parents that we're helping take care of, and my mother-in-law just ended up in the hospital recently, so there was a bit of a concern there. And our productivity goes down. We get distracted. We can't focus. We can't think. And by its own nature, a project is a change initiative. So we're actually initiating a change and causing that disruption. So we get into concepts like resilience and how resilient are you and your team to that change, and how quickly can you return to productive behavior in the face of disruptive change. So you want to be kind of factoring some of those things in. Okay, so here's our next question. What can we do about it? How can we improve that productivity? Okay, let's see. Oh, got some questions rolling in already. Awesome. There's some answers I need. Okay. Oh, from Beth, communicate, communicate, communicate. Much like the old real estate answer, right? Absolutely. Make sure to set the expectations are clearly defined. Absolutely, Debbie. Yes, clearly define those expectations. A lot of what we do in project management, the success hinges around those expectations pieces. Absolutely, and communication is going to be a key role in managing that. From Sarah, when schedule overload is the norm, culture shift is needed. Oh yes, thank you so much. Clear tracking to provide evidence of why time assumptions are not appropriate originally to gain traction. Yes, absolutely. And you know, Sarah, you get into that scenario, and that's a tough uphill battle. It's, you know, if that's the cultural norm within your organization, it's going to take a long time to get that. But, you know, developing some of that or building some of that evidence-based so that you can show that it is not, it's not opinion, it's quantified. And I'm going to go back to Jim Collins' book, Good to Great again. There's actually a section in this book where he highlights a school teacher who's a science teacher, and he talks about this person created his own little pocket of excellence. So you know what, do the best you can within the resources that you have, but yeah, start to build some of that evidence. Beautiful. Reasonable schedule, allow them to have a break. They need to keep the momentum. Absolutely, Kim. Beautiful. And the funny thing with that is we've got to find the right balance between giving them enough time to get the job done, but also still having that sense of urgency. And there's actually a concept that neuroscientists have dubbed the college student effect, which is when you give someone a job, they typically wait till the night before. You know, they leave it to the last minute. So we definitely do want to create a level of urgency, but we also want to make sure that it's you know, realistic. Which I mean goes back to the whole, you know, SMART goals. Are they, you know, specific, measurable, attainable, that sort of thing. Excuse me. From Ramesh, motivate people by providing facts about the change taking place and explain the new plan. Absolutely. People do not like working in a vacuum. Humans crave feedback. And one of the best quotes I heard around this is that if you don't believe this, look at the most hardened criminals. They cannot stand going into solitary confinement. And in fact, in solitary confinement, that is really the ultimate in lack of feedback. You've got absolutely zero feedback. And think about this in your next interaction. So after a seminar, you know, you go to the coffee room to grab a coffee, and you see one of your teammates, and there's a ton of interaction going on even before you start speaking. I mean, you might just look up at someone and, you know, give a slight nod or acknowledgement that they're actually there. And think about your reaction and feeling when someone walks by you and doesn't even acknowledge your presence. You know, you really got to give them that that feedback, give them that you know, people need to know where they are and what they're doing. So yeah, some great answers there. Thank you, guys. So what can we do about it? Here's some tangible things. Number one, establish your priorities. And you'll notice I actually put that ahead of manage expectations. And here's why. We need to establish the priorities. What is the priority of the project? Is it time? Is it cost? Is it scope quality? Is it risk? Because that's how we're going to start and manage our project. And if we don't have alignment on that, you're not going to be able to manage your expectations. So if you've got a project, for example, we're going to do a Labor Day party, okay? Well, we've got a very definite timeline. We've got a hard stop there, you know, September 1st. So we now know what our priorities are. We have to hit that date. I mean, you couldn't deliver that project, you know, September 15th, right? But if I'm working with like a very tight budget, maybe the cost, this is the only money that we have, and we can't go beyond that budget, and that's going to be a key constraint, then perhaps the time is going to be the one that's going to have a little bit of flexibility to it. So we need to establish those priorities so that we can better identify what the expectations are. If the expectation is that it is absolutely delivered on time, okay, we need to find the right balance around how much is that going to cost and what's the scope going to look like and how much risk are we willing to take and so forth. So when we start to get, if we've established our priorities, then we can manage to those, right? And that's really how we're gonna drive our project. And the third one I put in here is negotiation. And it came up. Both negotiating for key resources. So when that key resource is not available, well, instead of just accepting it, how about if we have a conversation and try to get that key resource? And this takes us right back to step one when we talked about why are we doing the project. Because if we haven't identified the why really well, our negotiation strength position is actually much reduced. If I've got a really good why, then I've actually got a much better negotiation position, because now I can come forward to that negotiation from a position of strength and power, where we know what's going on. But I'm also going to come at it from a standpoint of realistic, because you know what, if the why we're doing this is kind of a little bit lower on the list, and it's not as time sensitive, going back to our priorities, I'm not going to negotiate for time, I'm going to negotiate for money, because that's really going to be my key constraint. So really understanding what the priorities are and then managing those expectations, and we need to negotiate. I've been amazed over the years that when I've been given heavy constraints and I simply ask for, well, can we have a little bit more time, or can we have a little bit more money, things often come out of the woodwork. So we're going to focus in on negotiation, and we're going to actually do a little negotiation exercise. So here's how this is going to work. I've just put a case study up on your screens. So I'm going to give you a minute to read that. And in the question box, okay, I want you to enter in your questions. So you're going to play Dr. McCoy, and I'm going to play Dr. Hatfield. Sorry, Hatfield, with a hat. Yes, we were just chatting about this before. So read the scenario, and when you're ready, what questions would you ask me going into this negotiation? So once you've had a chance to read the scenario, think about what questions would you want to ask me as we enter into this negotiation. Because I'm about to go buy that crop and knotweed. What is your budget? I actually have $3 million to buy the crop. Tell me about your current research timelines on this disease. Oh, great question. Thank you. The disease is actually called STACH. It's a rare children's disease, prematurely disfigures victims and causes brain damage. So it's a very unfortunate and debilitating disease, really affects their whole life. And we've just gotten word that there's actually a small community with several thousand children that are in danger, and there's been an outbreak, and we immediately need it. Knotweed takes 4 months to mature. I need it pretty much in the next 2 weeks. How many people are affected by this rare illness? The village that has been where the outbreak has several thousand, so it's about 8,000 people. but it's highly contagious. So if we don't get it contained quickly, we could be talking hundreds of thousands. How many people? What's your budget? Okay. Just waiting for some more questions here. Some good questions so far. Thank you. What is my estimated success rate? Great question, Daryl. My estimated success rate is about 98%, and that was on the last set of trials, and we think we've narrowed down why we're having that small 2%. The good news is, even with the 2%, they're not contagious. Is there a way we can leverage the knot? I need the whole crop, unfortunately. How long does it take for the disease to cause death? Months and years. The death rate is actually relatively low. It's the disfiguring and brain damage. So it's one of those things where people tend to live out their lives, but they've got disfigures and brain damage, so their quality of life is very low. Is there any alternatives to knotweed? No, unfortunately, there's not. And so these two questions actually came in from Mahesh and Elizabeth back to back. Is there any alternative to the knotweed in your solution? And unfortunately, no, there's not, especially with this timeline, because we need it within the next 2 weeks. Does Dr. Hatfield have any other options to use other than knotweed? So, we've already, we don't have that. Is there any way to build on how much? Is there any way to build on how much of the knotweed can be produced if we started on the disease and built the population? From Kim, I'm not 100% getting that. The crop takes 4 months. I need it in the next 2 weeks. So even if we started planting right now, even if we started planting right now, we wouldn't get the crop in time. Debbie has asked, can the dump of the chemical plant be postponed? So in your scenario, you've got a chemical plant being dumped. Great question. In the scenario that we've put together, no, it cannot. Where is the village located? And is it in an area that can be impacted, expected chemical dump by the water supply? The village is in Lower Slavovia, and it will be impacted, and unfortunately we can't kind of move it. So Kim, pollution. Oh yes, pollution, sorry. Built to the pollution, yeah, sorry. How much nutrient is required to neutralize 1 ton of waste? You guys need the entire crop. So for the Newpal side of the scenario, you need the entire crop. Can either formulation be modified to use less knotweed? Unfortunately, no, and our timelines are short, so we don't have time for clinical trials. Can we split the crop, mitigate the risk in both situations? Daryl, great question. So now starting to look at solutions where we're working together and kind of building it together. Do you understand the importance of why I need the crop? No, I don't, Eleanor, actually. I've got very little information about what you're doing, something about some pollution or something. Store chemical waste until the knotweed is available. Oh, there's an idea. Great idea, Mahesh. We could store it. Can the chemical waste be dumped into drums and then dumped later? Can your formula be delivered via water? I hadn't thought about that. No, we're doing it through injection. So I'm just going to, looking at the time, because I don't want to go too long on this, I'm just going to back up to one of the questions that was asked earlier. And let me just see where it was very early on, I think. There was some mention about knotweed seeds. So I'm hoping Dr. McCoy could explain to me a little bit there. You mentioned the seeds. I need the rinds. As we're both concerned with the conversion water supply, is there a way we could collaborate and make it work for both of us? Hi, Tesh. Yay. Awesome question. So here's the scenario, and this is the classic scenario. What Dr. McCoy needs is the knotweed seeds, and what I need is the rinds. So guess what? One crop will do us both, right? So the question of, is there a way we can collaborate, we can work together? When you get into a negotiation, you're wanting to work together towards a solution, okay? You want to work together towards a solution. So we need to reduce the conflict, because the higher the conflict, the further we are away from problem solving. So when we reduce conflict, we get down to a point where we're actually working together, as I like to say, shoulder to shoulder, walking in the same direction towards a solution. When we get to the other end of the conflict spectrum, we are getting into things like mediation, we're getting into things like arbitration, and even worse, litigation, where we're now moving apart and not moving together towards a solution. So we really want to look at how can we, collaboratively work. And based on this scenario, so we hand this out in class, where we give one sheet to each person, and then we get all the McCoys to meet up with all the Hatfields and negotiate it out. And out of a class of, let's say, 60, 80, 100 people, about 10% sort of figure it out within about the first minute or two. And then the rest usually end up, sort of butting heads and coming to a bit of a loggerheads and a bit of a stalemate, because what ends up happening is we get very positional. We get very much, this is what I need and this is what I get. And a lot of times people start coming at it like, okay, well, I'm saving children here, or I'm solving disease and saving hundreds of thousands of lives, and they start to look at, how can I make my side more important? What you want to do is you want to understand the other side, because if I understand the other side, now I have the information to work together collaboratively. And this concept, if you want to explore it further, I'd recommend picking up the book called Getting to Yes by Uri and Fisher. And if you just Google Getting to Yes, you'll find it. It's in like its 48th edition or something, and it's the absolute Bible to negotiation. So you really want to be understanding both sides of the coin and working in that much more collaborative nature. We often get very adversarial in our interactions, especially when the stakes get high, and that's the scenario that we built here with the knotweed. Both sides have very strong points and very, very worthy causes. Okay, so let's take all of this back now to our original case study. Our Acme Corporation decides to sell off its rocket-powered roller skate division. So when we're going to relocate the offices, questions are, what's our initial schedule, which resources are doing what tasks, and who's overloaded and who's underloaded, and this is where we would bring in the skills of negotiation. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on the technical aspects of this, but we've got our network diagram in the upper left here and our Gantt chart in the upper right, and it's really showing the same data. So when we take a look at the first 5 paths, for example, those first tasks that are starting, we see them also showing up in the Gantt chart. So when we look at this, the case study with the network diagram and the Gantt chart, we're really seeing the same data. Now, the big advantage with the network, or excuse me, with the Gantt chart is we truly see where the overlaps occur. So if I take a look at negotiate, lease, and approval, and I compare that over here, I can see where the overlap is, and I can see where the overlap actually stops. I can also see where the overlap is on the first set and where those stop. So I can now really get a very clear picture of when people are actually overloaded and when they're not, and leveraging things like float, and I can start to shuffle things around and really develop out something that is going to be more realistic. So some key points. Be aware of biases, and there's actually a number of different biases. We touched briefly on merge bias, and we touched briefly on optimism bias. The best way to combat those is, just be aware of it. Take a look. Are you being highly optimistic? Are we in one of those scenarios where people are saying, we really need this fast and quick, and we're like, oh yeah, we can, yeah, we might be able to pull that off, and really pay attention to the influx or the intonation and so forth when you're having those communications. And this is why the face-to-face is often so very, very key. Productivity. You cannot sprint a marathon. For any of those of you who are runners out there, if you've ever tried to run a long-distance race like a marathon, I am not a runner. My longest I've ever done was a 5K. It was a 20K rally. I did 5K, and it took me a couple tries before I actually got to doing 5Ks all the way through. But I did do the CN Tower stair climb a couple times. And the first time out, classic mistake, I got onto the stairs and everyone's excited, and I started booting up those first few flights, and I got through about 3 or 4 flights of stairs and just hit the wall. and it was a painful rest of the climb. The second time I did it, my main target was to not stop the entire way, and I just quietly walked up the whole set of 144 flights, and my time was actually better the second time around than the first time. So you know, we talk about sprinting, and you think, well, if I sprint, I'm going to get faster, but you know what? You got to remember, when you sprint, you've also got to take a rest. So marathon pace, long run will work. Work as partners, not as adversaries. We touched on this at the end of our negotiation piece. Most organizations, when you're doing a project, it's internal, you're working with internal clients, you're all on the same team, folks. Don't forget that. And in fact, I've found that phrase extremely powerful. You get into the middle of something, you've got another department, they're causing you all kinds of trouble. You know what? Take a step back, take a breath, remind everyone at the table, including yourself, that you know what, you're partners in this, not adversaries. And even when you're dealing with external third partners, I mean, the reality is people want the project to succeed, right? Negotiate. Don't just simply accept those unreasonable expectations. Don't just accept those. You know, negotiate for the resources. If this truly is an important project and you really think you know, this is necessary, awesome. Let's put your money where your mouth is, and let's put some resources there. And then finally, manage your expectations. And a lot of these are tools to managing those expectations, because if you know, you can deliver projects late, you can deliver them over budget. If the expectations are managed, you have a success. Okay. And this is where I want to just bring this all back to BHAGs. BHAGs are actually very good things. BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. When do we do our best work? When we're striving to go beyond our normal comfort zone. And there's all kinds of data backing this up. If you look at Dodson's Law, which came out in, I think it's 1908, it talks about optimal anxiety. And when we increase someone's stress level, we increase their anxiety, we increase their productivity. So what ends up happening is when you're bored, your productivity goes down. When you're stressed, your productivity goes up. Now, to a point, right? And this is the optimal piece of the optimal anxiety, because when you overstress someone, you know, they burn out, you know, it just becomes too much, and they fry, right? So you finding that right point, and that's where the BHAG is all about, because you've got there's good BHAGs and there's bad BHAGs. So pick up that book and take a good look at it. There's some really good stuff there, but you want to really kind of find, you know, that right balance, okay? And you know, when you have that, you know, we're pushing a little bit harder and we're kind of striving beyond, that can be a very good thing. But we also have to do it within balance, because oftentimes the pushing harder involves a sprint, and again, you can't run the marathon at a sprinting pace. Which is going to bring us back to our opening thought. Be quick, but don't hurry. So you take a look at marathoners. You take a look at something like a basketball game. And when you've got that nice, efficient pace, they're not hurrying, but they're being very quick. Not a huge sports guy, so when I first picked up this book, I thought, oh man, it's about basketball. But you know, I went through it and it's like, wow, this is actually really good. So I wasn't, you know, I'm not a huge basketball fan, but the lessons in there are really true. And my sport of choice is actually horseback riding. And one of the things I love to watch in show jumping is when you see, and especially the Europeans and the Germans are brilliant at this, they go around the course, and this is a timed event, folks. This is a timed event that comes down to hundredths of a second. They go around the course, and they look like they're on a Sunday afternoon ride, just going nice and easy. And meanwhile, they're putting in blistering fast times. So, you know, if we can not hurry, we'll be efficient. We'll get things done right. We'll get it done right the first time, so we don't have to redo it. And you know what? You'll actually end up being nice and quick. As opposed to if you hurry and make mistakes and have to go back and make fixes and so on, you lose efficiency, you burn extra energy, it's not sustainable. And this is why I chose the quote for today of be quick but don't hurry.